I've been a ranger for 7 years and I'm used to isolation, but the deep, permanent silence of the Blackwood Peaks was becoming something heavier, something oppressive. It was early November and the first true blizzard had sealed the canyon trails a week ahead of schedule. My retrieval team was delayed by 5 days. I was not just alone. I was marooned in Outpost Delta. The incident in the Whispering Ravine, the massive, disturbing sapling nest, kept looping in my mind. I revisited my photos. The saplings weren't just broken by force, they were meticulously chewed and sucked clean. The bark, the soft inner layer, gone. It smelled faintly of old, wet iron. It was a feeding pattern that defied every mammal in the region. I tried to radio the main station, but the static was a permanent fixture now, a deep, grainy sound like grinding teeth. The isolation was starting to feel less like a state of being and more like a carefully constructed trap. That evening I heard the sound outside the cabin, not the wind, but a rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It circled the cabin for an hour, never rushing, just methodically testing the perimeter. As it thumped past the window, a flash of movement made my stomach drop. It wasn't just walking, it was dragging something behind it, something heavy and wet that slid in the dirt and snow. I couldn't see what it was, but the sound was sickeningly organic. I didn't sleep that night, staring at the cabin's single iron stove that now served as my only defense against the door. The next morning the blizzard had passed. The methodical thumping had left tracks, massive four-toed footprints that didn't just sink into the snow, they seemed to compress the earth beneath it. I decided to patrol the boundary on the snowmobile, just to break the siege of my mind. That's when my engine snapped dead. Mid-throttle. The key was gone. Vanished. It wasn't an accident. I felt the cold realization settle. This thing was toying with me. It wanted me helpless. I spun around, and there it was, not 50 yards away, standing impossibly tall, at least 10 feet. The Wendigo. Its body was an atrocity of nature, a skeletal frame draped in skin the color of old milk. Its hands were horrifying, structured like a human's but tipped with black, obsidian claws that were constantly twitching. Its head was too large, crowned with wet, dark antlers that looked like they were still growing. Its eyes were deep black sockets, but I saw something in them, a chilling, ancient intelligence. Then the jaw unhinged. It split horizontally, opening far too wide, revealing shattered bone-white teeth. And it didn't roar. It laughed, a high-pitched giggle, layered with a wet, sloshing gurgle deep in its throat, like a lungful of mud. I pulled my sidearm and fired 3 rapid shots. The bullets hit, leaving dark blooms on the creature's chest. It didn't flinch. It merely tilted its massive head, its impossible mouth remaining wide in that silent, horrifying laugh. Then it dropped. It dropped onto all fours, its long limbs bending at unnatural angles, and scuttled toward me with a terrifying, fluid speed that defied physics. The sound of its claws clicking on the icy patches was the only thing I could hear over the pulse in my ears. I turned and ran, navigating the maze of trees. I realized it wasn't chasing me in a straight line. It was appearing and disappearing, using the dense growth to obscure its movements. It was a cat with a mouse, always keeping me in sight, always forcing me toward the cabin. Halfway back, I looked down, and my foot caught on something slick and hard beneath the snow. I stumbled, scraping my hands. I looked back and saw it, the snowmobile key. It had been dropped directly in my path, a final, taunting joke. I didn't dare stop for it. I burst into the clearing. I threw the heavy iron stove against the door and dived under the bed, clutching my rifle. The silence was the worst. It was the silence of something waiting for its final moment. Then the rhythmic thump, thump, thump started right outside the heavy cabin door, walking slowly around the perimeter again. This time I could hear the dragging sound distinctly, a heavy, scraping weight in the snow. Then the voice started. It began as a slow, clear loop of my radio message from the previous month. Outpost Delta, all clear, Ranger Alex logging off. It repeated it 4 times perfectly before adding a new sentence in a slightly choked, wet tone. Alex, you're not logging off. Not yet. Then the chorus of familiar voices began. My father's, Sarah's. The weeping started, the heartbroken sobbing of my father. I was shaking, praying for the sound to stop. Finally, the crying shifted. It didn't sound like grief anymore. It became a sound of ecstatic, starved laughter, still in my father's voice, layered with the gurgling from the creature's throat. The scraping began then, not just teeth grinding on wood, but a sound like 36 long fingernails digging deep, tearing at the wood, trying to core the logs. The splintering wood above the stove gave way slightly. A sliver of bark fell onto the stove top with a tink. Then a new voice cut through everything. It was the sound of a child crying out in pain. A thin, shrill sound, followed by the terrifying, familiar giggle. "Alex, it's too late for the little ones, but you can still help us." I knew then what the creature was dragging and what the sapling nest had been for. I squeezed the rifle, tasting bile. I closed my mind, reciting coordinates, equipment lists, anything to drive out the voices. I knew if I broke, if I looked, it would win. I held my breath, shivering, for what felt like the final hours of my life. The sounds of tearing and shrieking continued, interspersed with my father's joyous, distorted laughter, until just before the first weak light of dawn. Then silence, a deep, final, hungry silence. When the search and rescue helicopter finally arrived, I was dragged out, barely functional. But here is the final, true horror of the Blackwood Peaks. The superintendent showed me the radio logs. Not just my supposed retirement call, but a transmission logged 5 days after I was rescued. It was a voice, high quality and clear, coming from the GPS coordinates of Outpost Delta. It was my voice. Perfect, calm, professional. "Central Command, this is Ranger Alex. Status report. The area is secure. The snowmobile is operational. Everything is fine. I am now proceeding with my patrol. I believe I saw a large bull elk dragging a heavy object into the ravine earlier. I will investigate and update you shortly." The creature was not just wearing my voice, it was wearing my identity. It had taken over my post. But there was one final, chilling audio file attached to that log, a recording picked up by the radio's open mic just before the line cut out. It was the sound of something large, heavy, and wet dragging something across packed snow. And accompanying that dragging sound was a quiet, deep, contented purring, followed by the clear, mocking sound of my own professional chuckle.